The Duke of Winford saw the ring before he saw the woman, and the sight of it stopped his heart. It was a small gold ring, worn thin, set with a single modest sapphire. Nothing grand, nothing a duke's household would ordinarily notice, and it was on the hand of the seamstress who had come to fit the new housekeeper's mourning, and it was, without any possibility of doubt, his dead wife's ring. He had put it on Catherine's hand himself, 6 years ago, on a morning that smelled of hawthorn. It was not the great Winford betrothal diamond, but a smaller thing, a private thing, the ring he had given her not for the world to see, but for herself, engraved inside the band with 2 words, only she and he had ever read. He had buried her in it, or he had believed he buried her in it, 3 years ago, when the carriage went off the coast road in the storm and into the sea, and they had recovered the wreck and one of the bodies, and enough of Catherine's things to be certain, and he had grieved her and mourned her, and remained, in the 3 years since, a widower closed like a fist around his loss. And now a seamstress he had never seen was kneeling in his housekeeper's room with pins in her mouth, and on her thin, work-worn hand was Catherine's ring, worn as though she had worn it for years. "Where?" said the Duke of Winford, and his voice came out so strange that the seamstress startled and looked up. "Did you get that ring?" She rose, flustered. A duke did not ordinarily address the sewing woman, and dropped a curtsy, and then, following his fixed stare to her own hand, she covered the ring instinctively with her other hand, an old protective gesture. "It is mine, your grace," she said. "I have always had it. I mean no. It is nothing valuable, only sentiment. I have never— Is something wrong?" And the Duke of Winford looked up from the ring to the woman's face for the first time, and the room tilted around him, because although her hair was grayer than it should have been, and there were new lines of hardship in her face, and she was thin, in a way Catherine had never been thin, and although she was dressed in the plain, worn clothes of a woman who sewed for her bread, the face beneath the changes was— It could not be. It was— Catherine, he whispered. The seamstress went very still. Something moved across her face. Not recognition, which was the terrible thing, but a kind of frightened confusion, the look of a person who has been shown a word in a language they half remember and cannot read. "That is not my name, your grace," she said carefully. "My name is Kate Miller. I am the seamstress from the town. I think— Forgive me. I think you have mistaken me for someone. It happens sometimes. I have one of those faces, they say, but I am only Kate. I sew. I do not know any Catherine." But her voice had shaken on it, and her hand had tightened over the ring, and the Duke of Winford, staring at the living face of the wife he had buried 3 years before, understood that he had walked into the single most impossible morning of his life, and that nothing about it made sense, and that he was not, whatever else was true, mistaken. Because a man does not mistake the face he loved and lost, and he was looking at Catherine, his Catherine, alive, in his own house, wearing the ring he had put in her grave, and calling herself by another name, and not knowing him at all. The truth of it came out slowly, and in pieces, over the difficult weeks that followed, and it was stranger and sadder than anything the Duke could have invented. He did not frighten her. That was the first thing, and the hardest, because everything in him wanted to seize her, to shake her, to demand that she remember, to weep on her and make her know him. And he understood, watching the frightened confusion on her face, that any of that would only terrify a woman who genuinely did not know him, and drive her away. And so he held himself, with an effort that cost him more than anything had ever cost him, to gentleness and patience. He did not claim her. He asked, instead, if he might speak with her and hear her story, and he listened, and slowly the shape of the impossible assembled itself. Kate Miller, as she had called herself for 3 years, knew almost nothing of her own life before a certain morning 3 years past. She had been found, she had been told, half drowned and senseless on a beach some 40 miles down the coast, after the great storm, washed up alive where the sea had thrown her, gravely injured, her head badly hurt, more dead than living. Fisherfolk had taken her in. She had survived, slowly, over months. But when at last her body mended, Her memory had not. The whole of her life before the beach was simply gone. A blank, a locked door she could not open however she battered at it. She did not know her name. She did not know where she had come from, or who she had been, or whether anyone in the world was mourning her. She had nothing at all of her former self except two things: a wedding ring on her finger, worn and unremovable, engraved inside with two words she did not understand, and a certainty, bone deep and inexplicable, that she had once been loved by someone, and had loved him, and had lost him, though she could not remember his face, or his name, or anything about him, but the ache of the loss. She had built a life out of nothing, because there was nothing else to do. The fisherfolk were poor, and could not keep her. She had a gift with a needle. It emerged, her hands remembering what her mind could not, and she had made her way, over 3 years, from village to town, sewing for her bread, a quiet, graying woman, with no past and no people, known as Kate Miller, because she had to be called something, and it was as good a name as any. She had made her peace with the blankness, mostly. She had stopped battering at the locked door, and she had kept the ring, always, her one thread back to whoever she had been, and had wondered, on the hard, lonely nights, about the man she was certain she had loved and lost, and had assumed she would wonder about him, unanswered, until she died. And then she had come to fit mourning for the housekeeper of Winford Court, and a duke had looked at her ring, and gone white, and called her by a name she did not know, Catherine, and something behind the locked door had stirred, for the first time in 3 years, and frightened her half to death. "You knew her," Kate said, on the third of their careful conversations, in the housekeeper's parlor with the door open, and the housekeeper herself sitting by for propriety. "The Catherine you keep almost calling me. You knew her, and I look like her, and it distresses you, and I am sorry for it, Your Grace. Truly. But you must stop, because when you say the name, something happens in my head, a kind of pull, like a sound I almost recognize, and it frightens me, because for 3 years the door has been shut, and I have learned to live with it shut, and you are rattling the door, Your Grace, and I do not know what is behind it, and I am afraid of what is behind it, and I am afraid of hoping there is anything behind it at all." Her voice broke. Who was she? Who was Catherine? And why do you look at me as though I have come back from the dead? And the Duke of Winford, gently and carefully, and with his own heart breaking, told her, not that she was Catherine, not yet, for he could see it would shatter her, but the facts, laid quietly out, that his wife Catherine had been lost 3 years ago, when her carriage went off the coast road into the sea in a great storm, that her body had never truly been recovered, only a body they had believed was hers, and her things washed up, and enough to make them certain, that he had buried her and mourned her, and that the ring on Kate's own hand was, without any doubt, the ring he had put on Catherine's hand, on their wedding morning, engraved inside the band with 2 words. "May I tell you," he asked, very low, "what the 2 words are, without looking? If I can tell you what is engraved inside your own ring, Kate, the ring you say you have always had, that you have never shown to me, then you will know I am not a madman, and that whatever else is true, that ring was mine to give, and I gave it, and I know what it says because I chose the words myself." Kate Miller stared at him, white to the lips, her hand closed hard over the ring, and after a long moment she nodded, once, unable to speak. "It says," the Duke of Winford said, and his voice did not hold quite steady, "always, and after, always, and after. I had it engraved for her because she asked me, on the morning I gave it, how long I would love her, and I said always, and she said always ends. Everything ends, even always. And I said then after, I will love you always, and after always ends, I will love you after. And she laughed and cried at once, and made me put the foolish words inside the ring, so she could read them whenever she doubted. Always, and after. Take off the ring, Kate. You have never let me see the inside of it. Take it off, and read what is written there, and tell me whether a stranger could possibly have known." And Kate Miller, with trembling hands, worked the worn ring off her thin finger for the first time in 3 years. and turned it to the light, and read the two small engraved words she had carried unread against her skin for 3 years. The words she had never been able to make sense of. The words of a language she could not remember learning. Always. And after. And she made a sound that was not quite a word, and the ring fell from her fingers to the floor, and behind the locked door in her mind, for the first time in 3 years, something gave. The memory did not come back all at once. That was the mercy and the cruelty of it both. It came back the way a drowned country comes back when a flood recedes, in patches, islands surfacing one at a time from the gray water, connected at first by nothing, so that Kate would suddenly know the smell of hawthorn meant something, or find her hands moving through the steps of a dance she did not remember learning, or weep without warning at the sight of a particular blue, and not understand why. The 2 words had unlocked the door, but what lay behind it was not a room she could simply walk into. It was 23 years of a life, scattered and waterlogged, and it surfaced slowly, painfully, over weeks and then months, and the surfacing was its own kind of ordeal, because each returning island brought grief with it, the grief of everything she had lost, and was only now learning she had lost, 3 years late. The Duke of Winford was there for all of it, and his patience through those months was the truest love he ever showed her, truer than any grand gesture. He did not rush her. He did not demand that she be Catherine before she was ready, or grieve that she was not yet the wife he had lost, or let his own desperate longing to have her back become a weight upon a woman struggling to reassemble herself. He simply stayed, and was gentle, and gave her back her life in pieces as she could bear them, telling her their history when she asked, and not before, showing her the places and the portraits and the small domestic sacraments of the marriage she had forgotten, letting her relearn him at her own pace, courting his own wife all over again, as patiently as if she were a stranger, because in the ways that mattered, for a time, she was. And the strangest, most tender thing of all emerged in those months, which was that Kate, who did not yet fully remember loving him, began to fall in love with the Duke of Winford again, freshly, as though for the first time. She watched this patient, grieving man care for her with such gentleness, ask nothing of her, wait upon her broken memory with such fierce tenderness, and she found herself drawn to him, moved by him, warmed by him, not with the recovered love of Catherine, not yet, but with a new love, Kate's love, born in the present, out of who he showed himself to be. And the Duke understood, with a kind of awe, that he was being given something almost no widower is ever given, the chance to win his own wife twice, to be loved by her not once but in 2 separate lifetimes, the old love slowly surfacing from the drowned country, even as a new love grew fresh in the daylight, until he could not always tell which was which, and neither could she, and it did not matter, because they were both real, and both his, and both her, and the 2 loves twined together into something richer than either alone. There was one afternoon in those recovering months that the Duke kept, ever after, as the moment he first dared to believe he might truly have her back. He had been showing her the gardens, not to force her memory, but simply because it was spring, and she had been pale from too much time indoors, wrestling with the locked door of her mind, and he thought the air would do her good. They had come to the far corner of the walled garden, where an old hawthorn stood in white blossom, and Catherine, Kate, still, that day mostly, had stopped beneath it, and gone very still, and lifted her face to the blossom, and breathed in. And then she began, without any warning, to weep. The Duke went to her, alarmed, but she caught his arm to steady herself, and shook her head. It was not distress, or not only distress. The smell, she said, her voice strange. The hawthorn. I know it. Julian, I know it. There is a morning that smells of this, exactly this, and I am happy in it, happier than I have ever been. And there is a ring, and a man saying, how long will you love me? No, that is wrong. I say it. I say, how long will you love me? And he says, she pressed her hand to her mouth, shaking, always. He says always. And I say, always ends. And he says then after. And I am laughing and crying at once under a tree that smells like this, exactly like this, and it is the happiest moment of my whole life, and I did not even know I had lost it until this instant." She turned to him, her eyes streaming, wild with the terror and the joy of it. "That was us, wasn't it? That was the morning of the ring. I remember it. Not all of it. I do not remember the day before or the day after. They are still gone, still under the water. But that one morning, that one moment under a tree that smelled of hawthorn, it has come back. It is mine again, and it is us. And oh, Julian, I was so happy. We were so happy, and I lost it. I lost all of it, and did not even know." And the Duke of Winford caught his weeping wife against him under the hawthorn tree, in the exact place, though neither of them knew it until that moment, where he had given her the ring 6 years before. For it was this hawthorn, this corner, this tree, that had scented the morning of always and after. And he understood that the garden itself had given her back a piece of her drowned life, that the smell of the blossom had reached past the locked door where all his gentle words could not, and that somewhere in the ruined country of her memory, the islands were rising, and this was the first and dearest of them, the morning of the ring, restored. "We were happy," he said, into her hair, weeping himself. "We were so happy, Catherine, and we will be again. You have the morning back. The rest will come. I will show you every place, and tell you every story, and wait as long as it takes. And one island at a time, the whole country will rise, and you will be all the way home. You have the hawthorn morning. Hold on to it. It is the truest thing we have, and you found it yourself, which means it is really coming back. Really you coming back. Not me telling you who you were, but you remembering. Hold on to the hawthorn. The rest will follow it up out of the water. I am certain of it now. I was not certain before. I am certain now." And from that afternoon he was certain, and so was she, because the hawthorn morning had proven that Catherine was not gone, but only drowned, and that the drowned can, sometimes, with patience and love, and the right scent of blossom on the right spring afternoon, be raised. They went back to the hawthorn many times after, all through that spring, and it became their place twice over, the place of the ring, and the place of the first returning, and Catherine would stand beneath it, and breathe in the white blossom and feel, each time, a little more of herself rise up out of the gray water and come home. The facts of the disaster surfaced too, in time, as her memory returned, and answered the question of how the impossible had happened. The carriage had gone off the coast road in the storm, exactly as he had been told, but Catherine had not been alone in it. Her maid had been with her, a young woman of much her own build and coloring, and it was the maid's body, recovered and half-ruined by the sea, and dressed in Catherine's traveling things, that they had buried believing it their duchess. And Catherine herself had been thrown clear as the carriage went into the water, flung from the door, carried by the current not down to the rocks but out and along the coast, where the sea, which takes so many, for once gave one back, casting her half alive onto a beach 40 miles away, her head so badly struck against the rocks that when she woke, weeks later, the woman who had been Catherine, Duchess of Winford, was gone, and only a nameless survivor with a ring remained. It was no one's fault. It was only the sea, and the storm, and the terrible arithmetic of chance, a misidentified body, a current that ran the wrong way, a blow to the head, and it had cost them 3 years. 3 years in which he had mourned a living wife, and she had grieved a husband she could not name, 40 miles apart, each believing the other lost forever. She told him, too, in those months, the story of her 3 lost years, and it was a story that broke his heart and remade it at once, because it was the story of how much of Catherine had survived, even when Catherine herself was gone. For the nameless woman washed up on the beach had been, the Duke came to understand, unmistakably his wife in everything but memory. She had been kind, even at the bottom, even with nothing. The fisher folk who took her in were desperately poor, and the strange, nameless woman they had rescued could easily have been a burden to them. Instead, the moment she could stand, she had made herself useful, had cared for their sick and minded their children, and mended their nets and their clothes, had given back tenfold the little they could spare her, because kindness, it turned out, was not a thing Catherine did, but a thing Catherine was. So deep in her that even the drowning of her whole self could not reach it. She had gone through those 3 hard years, poor and nameless and alone, and had left behind her, in every village she passed through, people who remembered the quiet graying seamstress, with the sad eyes and the gentle hands, as the kindest soul they had ever met. The same thing, the Duke realized, that had been said of the Duchess of Winford before the sea took her. The rank had drowned, the kindness had floated, and she had been brave. She told him, haltingly, of the hardness of those years, the cold, the hunger, the particular terror of a woman alone in the world, with no people, and no protector, and no past, at the mercy of everyone, vulnerable in every way a woman can be vulnerable. She had faced it all without flinching, because there was no one to flinch to. She had kept herself respectable and fed and safe by her own wits and her own needle, through 3 years that would have broken many a woman born to hardship, let alone one who had, though she did not know it, been raised in comfort and married to a duke. She had not known she was strong. She had simply survived, because the alternative was to lie down and die, and something in her would not lie down. The same steel, the Duke thought, listening, that he had loved in her from the first, the quiet, unbreakable core of her, present and holding, even when everything built on top of it had washed away. I used to look at the ring, she told him, on the hard nights, when I was cold or frightened, or so lonely I could not bear it. I would look at the ring, and the 2 words I could not read, and I would think, someone gave me this. Someone loved me enough to put a ring on my hand, and words inside it. I was loved, once, by someone, however far away and however long ago and however lost. And on the very worst nights, that was the only thing that kept me from the river. Not the memory of the love, which was gone, but the fact of it, the ring, the proof that I had once been someone's beloved, even if I could not remember whose. You saved my life a dozen times over in those 3 years, Julian, and you never knew it, and neither did I. The ring you gave me on the hawthorn morning, I clung to it in the dark like a hand held out across the water. I did not know it was your hand, but it was. It reached me at the very bottom, and it held on, and it would not let me go under for good, always, and after. You wrote it 6 years ago, and it kept me alive 3 years ago, in a cold room 40 miles away, and neither of us knew. That is what love is, I think, not the feeling. The feeling can drown, I know now. The feeling can be taken by the sea like everything else. Love is the ring, the thing that stays when the feeling is gone, the hand held out across the dark water that will not let go, even when you have forgotten whose hand it is. And the Duke of Winford, hearing how his ring had held his lost wife to life across 3 years and 40 miles of dark water, understood that the vow he had engraved half in jest on a hawthorn morning, always, and after, had turned out to be the literal and saving truth, and he was never, to the end of his life, able to look at the worn gold band on his restored wife's hand without his eyes filling, because he knew now what it had done in the dark, and what it had held on to, and how nearly the sea had won, and how the 2 small words had reached down to the very bottom and refused to let her drown. But there was a complication, and it was a real one, and it came from the world's assumption that the Duke of Winford was a widower. For a widower, after 3 years, is a man the world expects to remarry, and the Duke of Winford had been, at the very time Kate walked into his house with the ring, on the edge of a second marriage. For the Duke of Winford had grieved Catherine as few men grieve, completely, and for a long time, and without the consolations that make grief bearable for most. He had not been able to throw himself into distraction, because nothing distracted him. He had not been able to find comfort in the memory, because the memory was the wound. He had simply gone cold, and closed, and moved through 3 years, like a man moving through deep water, doing his duty, seeing to his estate, and feeling nothing that he would have called living. He had kept her rooms as they were. He had kept in the drawer of his own writing desk the few things the sea had given back, a comb, a glove, a letter she had been carrying, and had taken them out on the bad nights and held them, and put them away again, and told no one. He had loved her past all reason while she lived, and he had gone on loving her past all reason after, a widower faithful to a grave, and the world had watched him do it, and shaken its head, and said it was a great pity, so young a man, so complete a devotion, and had waited for him to recover, and he had not recovered, because there was nothing to recover. The thing that had been taken could not be replaced, and he had known it, and had stopped expecting to be happy again, and had called the not expecting peace. And it was only after 3 full years, worn down at last by the relentless, gentle pressure of a family that would not let the dukedom die with him, the need for an heir, the weight of 300 years, the argument, endlessly repeated, that Catherine herself would not have wished him to mourn forever, that he had finally, hollowly, agreed to consider remarriage. Not for love. He had no love left to give. He had buried it in an empty grave. For duty only. For the heir the estate required. For the ending of the pressure. He had agreed to Lady Honoria, the way a man agrees to a necessary surgery, because it must be done, and there was no use in delaying it further. And one candidate was much like another, when one's heart was in the sea. And he had felt nothing about it. He had felt nothing about anything for 3 years. That was the man Catherine walked back to, wearing her own ring. Not a happy widower, ready to be displaced from a love match, but a grief-frozen man on the edge of a loveless duty marriage, who had given up on ever feeling anything again, and who had looked down at a seamstress's hand, and seen his dead wife's ring, and felt the frozen 3 years crack straight through, the whole drowned weight of his grief and his love surging back up into the light all at once, because the impossible had happened, and the sea had given her back. Her name was Lady Honoria, and she was suitable and handsome, and the match had been all but arranged, not from any great love on the Duke's part, for he had loved only Catherine, and had agreed to remarry, only from duty, the need for an heir, the weight of the dukedom, the gentle, relentless pressure of a family that would not let a widower grieve forever. He had consented, hollowly, to the arrangement, because Catherine was 3 years dead, and a man cannot mourn forever, and the estate required a duchess. The betrothal was not yet formally announced, but it was understood, and Lady Honoria and her family considered the thing as good as done. And then the Duke of Winford's dead wife had walked into his house wearing her own ring, and everything the world had arranged came apart. The Duke did not hesitate for one instant about which woman he wanted. Catherine was his wife, alive, restored, the one love of his life returned from the dead, and there was no arrangement on earth that could stand against that. But the situation was delicate and cruel in its way, because Lady Honoria was not a villain. She was a woman who had, in good faith, expected to become a duchess, and who now found herself set aside for a wife returned from the grave, and who could make, if she chose, a great deal of very ugly trouble, could question whether the seamstress was truly the lost duchess at all, could suggest fraud, could drag the whole strange, painful business through the courts and the newspapers, could poison Catherine's fragile return with scandal, and doubt at exactly the moment she was least able to bear it. And there were those around Lady Honoria, her ambitious mother chief among them, who urged her to do exactly that, to fight, to cast doubt, to refuse to be so easily displaced, to insist that a duke's promised bride could not simply be discarded because a madwoman turned up with a ring. It was Catherine herself who settled it, and the way she settled it proved, more than any ring or any engraving, exactly who she was. For as her memory returned, so did her character. And Catherine, Duchess of Winford, had always been, beneath the rank, a woman of rare and steady kindness, and 3 years of hardship as a nameless seamstress had not blunted it, but sharpened it, taught her from the inside what it was to be poor and overlooked, and at the mercy of the great. And when she understood the whole of the situation, that a woman had been promised her husband, and stood now to be publicly humiliated by her own return, and might, if cornered and shamed, be driven to make ruinous trouble, Catherine did not triumph, and did not fear, and did not hide behind her husband. She asked to meet Lady Honoria herself. They met privately, the returned wife and the displaced bride, And what passed between them, Catherine would only ever partly repeat, but its effect was plain to all. For Catherine did not come to gloat, or to warn, or to defend her claim. Her claim needed no defending. The ring, the engraving, the returning memories, the recognition of old servants who had known her for years, had already put her identity beyond any honest doubt. She came, instead, to be kind, to acknowledge, plainly and with real sorrow, the genuine wrong that her return had done Lady Honoria, who had expected in good faith to be a wife, and now would not be, through no fault of her own. "I have thought a great deal about you," Catherine told her, "since I learned you existed. More, I think, than you would expect the woman who has displaced you to think. Because I know exactly what it is to lose the life you thought was yours, through no fault of your own, by pure ill chance. It happened to me on a coast road 3 years ago. I lost my whole life in an instant, my name, my husband, everything. And I did nothing to deserve it. The sea simply took it. And now, through no fault of yours, you have lost the life you thought was yours, the marriage you were promised, because I came back from a grave you did not know was empty. I did not do it to wrong you. You did nothing to deserve it. We are, in that, more alike than either of us would have chosen, 2 women whose lives were overturned by a chance we did not author. And I find I cannot rejoice in my own restoration by standing on your humiliation, because I know too well how it feels to be the one the world's arithmetic discards. So I have not come to fight you, or to shame you, or to warn you off. I have come to tell you that I am sorry, truly sorry, for the wrong that my living has done you, and to ask, not demand, whether we might settle this as 2 women who have both been wronged by chance rather than by each other, with as much grace and as little cruelty as we can manage. I cannot give you back my husband. He was always mine, and he is mine still, and I will not pretend otherwise. But I can give you my genuine sorrow, and my friendship if you will have it, and the use of whatever influence a restored duchess possesses to see you happily and honorably settled elsewhere, with no shadow on your name. That is what I have come to offer. It is not everything you have lost, but it is offered honestly, from a woman who knows exactly what losing feels like. And Lady Honoria, who had come to the meeting braced for a rival, primed by her mother to fight, expecting cold triumph or nervous appeasement, was so entirely disarmed by being met, instead, with genuine sorrow and genuine kindness, from the very woman she had every reason to hate, that the fight went out of her, and the ugliness her mother had urged became simply impossible, because you cannot make cruel war on a woman who has just wept with you over the unfairness of chance and offered you her friendship. She had expected an enemy. She had found, instead, the kindest woman she had ever met, wearing the crown Honoria had wanted, and deserving it so plainly that resentment could find no foothold. "They told me to fight you," Lady Honoria said unsteadily. "My mother, to claim fraud, to make trouble, to refuse to be set aside. And I came here half meaning to. And instead you have come to say you are sorry, to me, when you owe me nothing, when you are the injured party 10 times over, 3 years dead, and come back to find your husband promised to someone else, and you are sorry for my inconvenience. I do not know how to fight that. I do not think I want to. My mother will be furious, but my mother has never lost anything to chance, and does not know what it is, and you do, and I find I would rather take the friendship of a woman like you than the husband of a man who was only ever marrying me from duty and grieving you the whole while. I release him gladly. He was never truly mine. He was always yours. He made no secret of it, poor man, even when he thought you dead. Be happy, your grace. You have come back from the grave to the kindest reception you could have arranged, and you arranged it by being kind first, which I begin to think is how you arrange everything. I will not make trouble. I will dance at the celebration of your return, if you will have me there, and I will look for a husband who wants me for myself, which, I see now, watching the 2 of you, is a far better thing to hold out for than a duke who was only doing his duty." And so the last obstacle dissolved, not through a battle, but through Catherine's kindness, which undid a potential enemy exactly as it had once, long ago, first won her a duke, And Lady Honoria did dance at the celebration, and did, in time, find a man who wanted her for herself, and remained, to the surprise of the whole county, one of the Duchess of Winford's genuine friends, because a friendship begun in that much grace does not easily break. The return of the Duke of Winford's dead wife was the wonder of the age, and the celebration of it, when Catherine's memory and health were fully restored, filled Winford Court with more joy than it had held in a generation. But the truest moment was a private one, and it came before all the celebrations. On the day Catherine's memory returned in full, the last of the drowned country surfacing at last, so that she woke one morning and was, entirely and completely, herself again. Catherine, and Kate, and both at once. The whole of her life restored, the 3 lost years, and the 20 before them all present and whole. She came down to her husband that morning, and he saw in her face that she was, finally, all the way back, and he could not speak. "I remember," Catherine said, "all of it, everything, the hawthorn morning, and the ring, and the words, and you. I remember you, Julian, not as a stranger I have come to love again these months, but as my husband, whom I loved for years before the sea took me. It has all come back. I am Catherine. I am your wife. I have been your wife the whole time, even lost, even nameless, even when I could not remember your face. I told you, when I was Kate, that I carried a certainty that I had once been loved by someone, and had loved him, and lost him, though I could not remember anything about him. Do you understand? Even with everything gone, even with my whole self drowned, that one thing survived. The love survived when nothing else did. I did not know your name, or my own, or anything at all, and I still knew, in my bones, that somewhere there was a man I had loved and lost. That was you. That never left me, Julian. Not even at the very bottom, not even in the blank. It was the one thing the sea could not take, always. And after. You wrote it in the ring, and it turned out to be true in a way we never imagined when you wrote it. That I would love you always, and then after, always ended, after my whole self ended, after even my name was gone. I would love you still, in the after, with nothing left but the love itself. The ring kept its promise. The love kept its promise. I came back to you across 3 years and 40 miles, and the drowning of my entire self, because always, and after, was the truest thing either of us ever said. And the Duke of Winford took his wife into his arms, his wife, returned from the dead, lost and found, loved in 2 lifetimes, and remembered at last in both, and wept, and she wept, and the 3 years of grief on both sides washed away, and did not come back. They renewed their vows, quietly, in the little chapel at Winford, with the whole grateful household looking on, not because the first marriage had ended, for it never had. She had been his wife the entire time, but because it seemed right to say the words again, over a love that had crossed death and come back. And this time, the Duke had new words engraved inside the old ring, added beneath the first, found again. Always, and after, found again. Kate the seamstress, and Catherine the Duchess, one woman, twice loved, restored. And the marriage that followed was, everyone agreed, the happiest in the county. Deepened, rather than diminished, by all it had survived. For a love that has been drowned and buried and mourned, and then given back, does not take itself for granted the way ordinary love does. Catherine, Duchess of Winford, who had lived 3 years as a poor, nameless seamstress, never forgot it. Never lost the hard-won knowledge of what it was to be overlooked and poor, and at the mercy of the great. And she used her restored consequence for exactly one purpose above all others: the care of the lost, the nameless, the washed up and forgotten. There was no destitute woman with no past and no people, no soul cast up by chance with nothing, that the Duchess of Winford did not seek out and help, because she had been one, had been Kate Miller with a ring and no name. And she knew, as no one born to comfort could know, that the nameless seamstress at your door might be anyone at all, might be a lost duchess, might be someone's whole world grieved as dead, might be carrying, unread against her skin, a promise she could not remember but had never broken. Be kind to the lost ones, she would tell her children, and later her grandchildren, when they were old enough to hear the impossible story of how their mother came back from the sea. The nameless woman who sews, the stranger with no people, the one the world has written off as no one. Be kind to her, always, because you cannot know who she is, or who is grieving her as dead, or what promise she carries that she cannot even remember. I was that woman. For 3 years I was no one, a seamstress with a ring and a blank where my life should be, and the world mostly looked past me, as the world looks past all such women. And I was a duchess the whole time, loved and mourned and searched for, and I did not know it, and neither did anyone who passed me by. Every lost soul is someone's whole world, my darlings, grieved somewhere as dead. Be kind to them. One of them, someday, may walk into a room wearing a ring and turn out to be a miracle. I did. Your father can tell you. He looked at a seamstress's hand and saw his dead wife's ring and did not turn away, and was gentle and waited and got me back from the very bottom of the sea because he was kind to a nameless woman who turned out to be his own lost love. Be that kind of person. It is how the lost ones come home.